And uh, I find myself being in the very interesting position after 10 years of academia and research and, having a PhD in the background. I switched to being medical intuitive and learning about bodies and learning about also mental health, like feelings and beliefs and the spiritual aspect of who we are and how it all intertwined. And I think what I do is I bring my investigative mind into my work with bodies as a medical intuitive. And I love learning about bodies and how our physical health and mental health intertwined. And I love helping mostly women to overcome like mental and physical health challenges. That's my passion. And yes,
So
I'm very, very familiar with the beast we call depression. I've been clinically depressed 3 times. So I'm, quite experienced here.
take us right from the beginning. Why did you get involved in doing this? And when you say that you're curious about the body, right? Like I know a lot of people can take that and it can mean so many different things, right? So tell us exactly what you mean, because maybe my curiosity with the body is different than your curiosity with the body.
Yeah, definitely. So, it started for me back in 2000, probably 2008, when my father was diagnosed with cancer. And I honestly, like, I knew he has a cancer before he was diagnosed. I could feel it. There was something about his energy that shifted like significantly, and I could feel that something was eating him inside out. And then he got his diagnosis, and I knew that was it. Like I knew he's gonna die very quickly. And although doctors told us that no, it's not terminal, he has chance, and he went through surgery. Um, he was suffering for 2 years, and he died from cancer anyway. And after that, it was kind of around the same time when I felt like I'm reaching my glass ceiling in academia, and I wanted to explore what else out there for me. How can I, serve people? Because I felt quite limited in academia, and I felt also it is very corrupted area, at least where I was, and I felt like I couldn't be true to myself, and I wanted to be true. And that's exactly where my first depression hit me. And I experienced my father's passing, and I broke up with my fiance, and I felt like I'm no longer in the place where I feel aligned in terms of career. And, pretty much all my life just crashed. And I found myself constantly crying. Like I was crying all the time. And I was, um, doing a lecture, for example, teaching my students, and I would find myself started crying right in the middle of lecture. And I was like, well, that's not okay. I have to address it. And I would come home and I would start crying and crying and crying. It was like unstoppable, right? And I consciously couldn't reach the reason. Like I couldn't feel exactly what I'm crying about. It was like without obvious reason. And I realized that I needed help. I needed professional help. And I tried several therapists until I found the right one. And, through therapy, I realized that over the probably 10 years of my life, I was accumulating a lots of sadness and grief, and I didn't address them. I didn't process them in the right way. And that's how I ended up with depression the first time. Right. I had several breakups with my partners. I broke up with my fiance. I lost my father. And I was trying to kind of skip over it and keep moving because there will be some positive things in life, just cheer up and life will get better. And I didn't, I guess, value those feelings like sadness and grief. I didn't want to look at them. I didn't want to acknowledge them and give them space. And that's how I ended up depressed.
I know for me, I went through something similar. There was a time where I was living on my own
Mm-hmm.
and I thought that I was free from my parents' control. I moved to a different part of the city. I was making new friends. And there was one year that was particularly bad, similar to what you mentioned, right? My
Mm-hmm.
parents' divorce, I almost lost the job that I had, and I had a relationship that ended all within a few months of each other. And I don't think I went through depression, but what I think looking back, what I went through was I was grieving because I knew the old me was being changed into the new me because all these things were going on. And I look back at that version of terrain and I was put in a situation where I had to sink or swim. Is that
Mm-hmm.
something that you were thinking to yourself, thinking, you know what, I'm Polina. Either I'm going to let this consume me and I go to spiral into a very dark period, which a lot of people go through, or I need to figure something out because now I'm depressed. Where do I go from here?
Yeah, I think you're right about grief. Like I find honestly, three of my depressions definitely were associated with grief, all of them. The grief was starting point for them, or maybe catalyst, for all of them, because I think grief is such a misunderstood feeling. Because I think for many people, grief is only about losing a loved one, but it actually is such a complicated feeling and such a common feeling, because sometimes we can grieve our identity, right? That is no longer there. Sometimes we can grieve a life that could happen but didn't happen. We can grieve about our plans, right? That could have happened within relationship, for example, that we had, right? And so I think grief is definitely a contributor. And my experience was that I didn't want to look into it. I was trying to avoid it, and I didn't want it to affect me. But then I was forced to, look at this and accept, yes, I'm grieving, the passing of my dad, and I'm grieving my relationship that didn't happen. And I had to allow myself to feel this grief. And honestly, and I know, by the way, many of my clients that I talk to, for example, sometimes they would say, I can't allow myself grief. I don't have time for this. I have to survive. But I think we can actually go over this process faster. I don't know if faster is applicable here, but in the more natural way, when we allow ourselves to feel it as deep as it's possible right now. Does it make
I will
sense?
agree. Yeah, it does, because I think we prioritize our trauma, right? So I'll give you an example. If I know that my family member is sick and they're going to pass, right? But I'm struggling financially, I'm struggling to put food on the table, I have to make a choice. Which
Exactly.
trauma am I going to focus on, right? It's going to be the food and shelter versus that. So I think it's more of what people call jokingly a first world problem where you're prioritizing your different traumas. But if you're poor, the only thing that's on your mind is I'm poor, I need food, I need shelter. But when you're grieving, it's like, okay, the old me is dying. It's being changed. Like it's easier to identify grief when someone has physically died, right? But what about the emotional side? What about the mental side, saying that I'm a different terrain, I'm a different
Mm-hmm.
Polina,
Mm-hmm.
but I have these other things that I need to focus on, and you have to juggle it because let's be honest, how many people can deal with multiple traumas all at the same time,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. When I moved to the US, that was a time for my second depression. And I felt so deeply depressed because, I felt like a fish just thrown out of water, and like I lost my in a way, kind of, I lost my community, my friends, my family, like all of that was left back in Russia. And I was faced with a completely new environment, new culture, new language, and I had to figure out, who am I here? And that's where I got so depressed, because I couldn't find myself. I couldn't find a place for myself. And I talked to other women who moved like me, and they're like, what are you talking about? We didn't have time for depression. We had to survive. We had to make money. And I found myself, okay, I probably am in the privileged position where I can feel all these feelings. And other people who moved to the US just didn't have a luxury of it.
Yeah, like if you were to go to, let's say if you got 100 people, 50 people who are earning more than the average and 50 who are earning below the average income, right? If you were to ask them if they have time to be depressed, grieving, they're probably going to tell you no. And they'll say, because I'm focused on this. Whereas maybe someone in your position or my position, we have what we would call the luxury of experiencing these things is because we have the time to think about it, right?
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm,
like that
mm-hmm.
old saying where idle hands is the devil's workshop, right? If you're sitting at home with nothing else to do, many people will do what? Think of what is going wrong with their life versus what is going right with their life. So I can see where people who were similar in your situation, who were moving, who were migrating to another country, another place, and saying that, hey, I don't have time for this because this is more important. When you heard that and you're seeing your peers saying that, how alone or maybe isolated did it make you feel?
Oh, horrible. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I felt very isolated. I felt, it's like, feeling lonely, being surrounded by people and still feeling lonely. Feel like you're alone, because nobody can understand where you're coming from and what you're feeling. And like, it's so hard to explain somebody, right? I know I was lucky to be surrounded by so many loving and caring people, and still they couldn't get it. And that's why I think the depression is such a complicated issue, that it's so hard for us when you're inside there in this dark place. It's so hard to explain to someone else what's happening to you, and you don't want to bother them, right? You don't want to overcomplicate it, but at the same time, I had a conversation with a friend who moved a year before me. She moved to Germany from Russia. I moved to the US a year right after her. And she knew what I was going through. And she called me and she's like, well, how are you? And I started crying right away. I just couldn't hold it. I just broke in tears, and she's like, oh, I see what's happening, because I knew she was probably one of the people who knew what I was going through, and she was going straight for it. And I realized that all my feelings that I kept suppressed were just blew up when she just asked me, how are you?
We forget how powerful that is. How are you doing today? Like that could change someone's entire mood because we could be going through our day and not hear it ever, even though we want someone to ask. Like I work from home, but I remember when I used to work into the office and I used to travel to and fro, I could count on probably one hand how many times people ask me, how are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
People are probably too busy.
Right, but another aspect of it, when they ask you how you're doing, do they really want to know? What do you think?
I think we assume that they don't want to know. Because how would you confirm that? Are you going to ask like if I were to ask you how you doing, are you going to say, Terrain, do you really want to know?
I have a very funny story about it. So it was my first visit of the US. It was back in 2015, and I came to Montana to take my first class. And then, completely new culture for me. I have no idea. And to be clear, people in Russia don't ask, how are you? Just don't. And especially, you know, um, the person at the checkout, at the store, nobody's asking you how are you. They just count all the money you have to pay, and nobody's asking you about how your day is going. It's just part of culture. It doesn't happen. And so here I am in Montana on one of my first days, and I got so sick. I have a cold, like, with a runny nose and fever. And I'm getting in the pharmacy like honey, lemons, some Advil, whatever. I don't remember what it was. But like, it's all very telling about what's happening with me. And I'm looking horrible, like I have a cold. And, the cashier asking me, how are you today? And I was like, could be better. And she's looking at me and like, you guys not from around here, are you? because because she doesn't expect to hear, like, that was my impression. She doesn't expect to hear, exact description of my feelings. Like, she doesn't want to know it. And here I am. I'm thinking, like, if she's asking, like, my first reaction, I have to be honest with her. Like, I'm looking horrible. I'm getting all this stuff. What do you think? How I'm feeling? Like, you know. And it was the first telling episode to me about how our culture is different.
Oh yeah, there's some people they will ask and they expect the answer is going to be that the person is going to say that they're doing well or they're good, right? So I'll give you an example. Sometimes when I ask someone like, "Oh, how are you doing today?" They tell me that the day is going well. You know what I do? I ask them, "Tell me what's making your day go well." So I challenge them to give me an answer because sometimes they think that my question is a default question, and so they give me a default answer. I was like,
Yeah.
no, I really want to know. So tell me what's making your day go well. I was walking my dog today, and every
Uh-huh.
person I saw, I said hello to. I don't care if you give me a dirty look or not, I'm going to make you say hi because I'm going to look you in your face and say, hello, Polina.
That's
Right?
great. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what we have to do more of because we're social creatures, right? We are
Yeah.
built to interact with people. So if I were to say to someone how you're doing and they're not doing well, like your example in the grocery store, that gives me the opportunity to say, okay, why isn't your day going well? Sometimes just showing someone you care, stranger or not, can improve your day. Now I'm not asking, to say, okay, give me a big hug, let's go off to on a first
Right.
date, and then afterwards we
Mm-hmm.
get married. No, ideally, if that works, that works. But in a lot of cases, that may not work. But showing that we can care, I think, is a first step, especially when someone is suffering some type of depression, anxiety, or whatever it is that's going on in
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. Another thing that I was thinking while we're talking about depression is, um, right, about the luxury of feeling those feelings. Because, like, remember the pyramid of needs, Maslow, right? There are like basic needs, physical needs, right? Then safety, and then the social needs and self-actualization at the top. And like, he's very clear that unless those physical and safety needs covered, like, you don't get to experience like other high levels of needs. They're not available for you, right? They're not accessible for you. But at the same time, as a medical intuitive, right, I want to share the point. What unfortunately is something that I see very often is that how negative feelings that we experience and suppress because we don't have time to feel them, how they actually being stored inside the body and how they affect us. That's not an easy, topic, but it is there. It's in the body. And what I see is that the feelings that we not processed, we not give them space, we not let them go, they actually negatively affect our physical health in terms of they make our organs vulnerable to pathogens, to disease, right? So they create higher risk to develop disease.
I will agree. And I think I forget the name of the book, but there is something, I think it's called Your Body Holds the Score in regards
Uh-huh,
to
uh-huh,
trauma,
uh-huh.
right? So anytime you're going through something and you're suppressing it, your body will show it in different
Eventually.
ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the longer it goes on, your body's going to eventually show it. So you may be a good job of not or poor job, depending on how you look at it, right? Of not communicating it, but your body will show you and it will show others. Because you mentioned the pyramid of needs, and you have the safety near the bottom, and then you have the psychological, and then you have love. So as you're escalating, you can go up. But there's some people, to your point, right? They don't have time to focus on what they truly want or the needs, right? So their
Mhm.
safety is food, shelter, which is for a lot of people, right? So they're already skipping one. Once they have that, I think a lot of people tie in the other ones. But for you and I, or for other people who have the time, we can say, okay, we need this, we need this, we need this as we're going up. So I wonder how many people accept just the basic needs of life and then convince themselves that they're okay,
Mhm.
right? Like that may be a question for those who are struggling understanding, hey, there's other things in life that you need to prioritize as well. But because they're not thinking about it, because they're preoccupied with the main focus of, I need to make sure my basic needs are covered. If I have that, I'm good.
Do you have children?
I don't have children.
Good for
I have
you.
a dog. I have a dog. It's
I'm
like a
just,
child.
yeah, I'm just thinking about like how many mothers like I know that, it's like when you have to take responsibility and take care of yourself, right? It's a one level of busyness and responsibility. Then when you become responsible for your child, one, two, three, it's a completely different thing. Like you don't have time for yourself until your kids go to bed like in like 8, 9, and then you're so